I remember times when he'd get so angry, I'd just get in the car and drive without any place to go. And I'd end up in front of the grocery store, just sitting. I felt so exhausted and confused. I'd ask myself, why is he so angry and critical? Can't he see he's hurting me and the children? You know, as soon as he'd walk in the door, he'd start shouting orders or yelling about who did this or who did that. And if I'd try to explain, he'd just turn on me. He'd burst into a rage over the smallest things, or else he'd withdraw into silence, and he wouldn't talk to me for hours, or sometimes even days. You know, I'd wonder if I really was being oversensitive, like he said. I thought, maybe I should be more considerate of his feelings. He did work hard, and he didn't mean to be so hateful. I'd go back and forth in my mind, thinking about what he had done or what I'd done to deserve it. I thought about what I could do to make him change. And sometimes I felt like it was just all my fault. And I always felt trapped, emotionally and financially dependent. Then I'd finally tell myself it probably wasn't as bad as all that. I'd resolve to try harder and hope that he would too.
Marriage. We were married for a year and a half, but throughout that year and a half, we had a lot of violence during that short period of time. My husband used to be very authoritative and say he wanted things done because he was the dad, he was God, and had my daughter convinced that anything that he said was actually the rule. And so there was a lot of conflict. There used to be beatings. I used to get beat up for not doing the dishes when he told me to do the dishes. Or if I felt that there was going to be any harm coming to my daughter, then I would protect her and take whatever abuse just to protect her. Sometimes it got real violent where he would kind of hard for me to say, but there were times when he'd actually take a shotgun to my head, you know. So there were times when I wasn't really sure whether I was going to live or die. He'd lock the children in the room and lock me in a different room and put the gun to my head and do a Russian roulette game.
Domestic violence is defined as intentional or reckless abusive behavior which occurs between adults or dating teens. A battering relationship is characterized by fear, oppression, and control. Psychological violence is intense and continuous mental degradation for the purpose of controlling the behavior of another, including intimidation, threats, manipulation, or brainwashing. Physical abuse includes hitting, kicking, grabbing, restraining, shoving, scratching, pushing, punching, hitting with objects or weapons, damage to property or pets. Sexual violence includes forcing a partner to perform acts against her will or spousal rape. Welcome to Women Today, sponsored by the Laguna Beach branch of the American Association of University Women. I'm Carol Sawyer. Our program today focuses on the identification of and recovery from domestic violence. We have with us in the studio 3 persons from local agencies, and we will also be watching 2 pre-recorded interviews, one a video of a victim of domestic violence, and another interview with an attorney, Gerald Klein, who could not join us today. During our program today, we will better understand domestic violence, including who are the victims and who are the abusers. We will recognize the cycle of violence and identify resources for breaking that cycle. We will begin by looking at laws and procedures related to domestic violence. Our first guest is the Chief of Police in the city of Laguna Beach, Neil Purcell. Chief Purcell, could you tell us how the police get involved in cases of domestic violence? Who calls? How are you contacted?
Well, normally we are contacted after the fact, after there's been a threat or after a battery has actually taken place. And we can get calls from the victim or from possibly another family member or a neighbor.
Mm-hmm. What is the nature of the police response when you receive a call like that?
Well, our response today is far different than it was a few years ago. Just to back up a little bit, traditionally, when police responded to a disturbance call of this nature, it was kind of written off as just a family beef, husband-wife spat, and our job was to separate the two and hopefully maybe talk the husband into going to a hotel. Today, though, with the emphasis that we place on the seriousness of this type of crime, is that when we roll out there, 9 times out of 10, there's going to be an arrest made, and the arrest is going to be made of the suspect, the person that actually committed the battery. As long as we can find some type of evidence that the person had been battered.
What would the nature of that evidence be?
It could be a bruise mark, it could be a reddening about the body, it could be where the victim indicates that she had been slapped or hit or shoved or pushed against a wall, knocked down, choked, anything like that. We would arrest the husband for a felony.
So you no longer work with simply recommending a cooling off period. You take a much more definitive action. Have the laws changed to make that possible?
Yes, they have changed in recent years, and I think the message that is being sent out by our legislation is that this type of behavior is not going to be tolerated. And the only way you can do it and put some teeth into it is give police the power to make arrest on the scene. And a lot of times these type of batteries are committed out of our presence, but they've made 273.5 of the Penal Code a felony. So, like I say, just a redness about the face or the body is all that we need to arrest the perpetrator.
What is 273.5 of the Penal Code?
That talks about spousal abuse.
Mm-hmm. What impact does an arrest have upon the abuser?
Well, I think it has a great impact in terms of a deterrent. In the past, when we used to just separate the two and send the husband off to a local hotel, he's either back in a couple hours or the next day, and again, the argument would start. But when a person goes to jail, I think that sends a clear message. And we've noticed in our city that we do not have the repeat calls back to the same house like we used to.
That's a real cooling off period. And a husband arrested for spouse abuse could expect to spend the whole night in jail?
He could, depending upon whether or not he can make bail. There are some times where we will arrest a person and then they are cited out. It depends upon the circumstances and how severe the battery was.
Chief Purcell, tell us the procedure if a woman wishes to get an emergency restraining order.
The process is much like the process for getting a search warrant by the police. We will first of all determine whether or not the criteria is met, such as is she a spouse or a related household member. Then we contact the detention release officer of Orange County, who then sets up a conference call with the on-call district attorney. We complete an affidavit or an application, and after that, the district attorney determines whether or not a judge will be called. Then the judge is called along with the criminalist from the Orange County Sheriff's Office. This is a taped conversation, and at that point, if the judge feels that there's a cause, he will then advise the police officer to put his name on the application and on the order itself, and then we go out and serve the order.
So these technical procedures are to ensure that there's a probable cause that the woman does need the protection of a restraining order.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. What do the police do in cases where a woman refuses to press charges against an abuser?
That creates a real problem for not only us, but especially the Orange County District Attorney's Office. If you have a hostile or uncooperative witness, or a witness that says, I'm not going to testify against my husband. There's just a recent Orange County case where it's alleged that a man and a wife get into an argument. He pushes her out of the truck. Then it's alleged that he runs over her 3 different times, and there's several witnesses to this. The suspect was apprehended a few hours later, placed in jail with a $250,000 bail. The district attorney's office was going to file a charge of attempted murder on him, and rightfully so. The wife comes forward and says, no, we really didn't have that big of an argument. I fell out of the truck, and I was not run over, and I'm not going to testify against my husband. As a result, the DA's office is left with no choice. There's a plea bargain in the makings, and it appears that this individual will end up with a probationary period. We do definitely need the woman or the wife to come forward and stand by and follow through the case.
All right, that's important. Thank you very much, Chief Purcell, for sharing this with us. Let's take a look now at the warning signals of an abusive relationship.
He seemed to be very assertive. Whatever he said, he did. Now I see it as more of a compulsive behavior. Taking over the parenting role and I let him do that because I saw him get more results with my daughter rather than how I was parenting her. Of course, I think that had to do with some of the guilt that I was carrying over from being a single parent. And then allowing him to come in and take over our household, I felt, well, he wants to be responsible. This is the dad that we've always wanted. Because I think in a sense, was looking for a figure to set me straight. Even though that was something that I always rebelled against as a child. So there were characteristics that I had seen: jealousy, possessiveness, extreme behavior, extreme emotions, very passionate one moment and very angry the next.
We have with us Jan Tyler, a community educator from Human Options, a women's shelter in South Orange County. Jan, we've just heard a description of some of the characteristics of an abuser. Could you tell us more about these men who batter?
Well, first of all, men who are abusive come from all kinds of backgrounds. Abuse seems to cross all racial, economic, social, and ethnic lines, so a man can come from any kind of situation and be abusive. Mm-hmm. Most of the men who do abuse their wives or their girlfriends grew up in homes where they either witnessed abuse or they themselves were abused, so it's a learned behavior. Many of these men are very insecure underneath, and this may not show to the general public, but it's very common with them. They often exhibit what we would call Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personalities. They can be very charming, very lovely, and very quickly flip to another personality that's often irrational and can be very violent at times. Alcohol or drugs play a part in many of these men's lives. That isn't a cause of the abuse, but it's definitely a factor.
This fact that it's a learned behavior is an important point, I think, because a learned behavior can be unlearned. Do we know how prevalent the problem is?
Well, it's very common. The FBI and actually the Attorney General's office in the state of California both estimate that 1 out of 4 families has ongoing violence between the spouses.
Let's take a look at why a woman would stay in a battering relationship as we go back to our video of Virginia.
I stayed because I didn't want to admit another failure, primarily. I felt that most of my adult life I had made some bad decisions, and I felt responsible and guilty. And so I felt guilty about not having a healthy relationship. And I felt that I was the wife, that I wanted to make it work, that I thought the words that I had spoken of promise, till death do us part, I meant, and I thought that I would do anything possible to make it work. I was literally humiliated to the point where I felt that I deserved nothing better.
Jen, why do victims of abuse stay in such a difficult relationship?
Well, actually, there are a number of reasons, and I'm sure they're different for different women. Often, they don't feel like they have a choice. Economically, maybe they don't see how they can support themselves and their children. A lot of times they stay because of children. They feel like they don't want to deprive their children of a father, or maybe they don't feel that they can adequately take care of their children on their own. A lot of times they stay because they think it's their fault. And if they just stayed and tried harder, maybe it would stop, maybe it would go away. Mm-hmm. Many times the women are very much in love with their husband still, and when he's not being abusive, he's caring and he's loving, so they stay because they like those times. One of the major reasons, and one that often isn't brought up, they a lot of times stay because they're afraid to leave. Sometimes the men threaten them. Often the men carry out these threats. Many abusive episodes occur after women leave the situation, and often after a divorce also.
The psychology of all this is very interesting. It is as though the woman has taken upon herself the fault for a situation in which she is actually the victim. Could you talk about that a little bit? It's a kind of denial of who's to blame here.
Yes. Actually, what occurs a lot of times in these relationships is almost a brainwashing technique, and the woman becomes convinced because she's told over and over again, if you just do things right, if you didn't mess up, I wouldn't have to hit you. If you would just have dinner on the table when I wanted, or cook the right things, or whatever it is. And after a while, she starts to really believe that she is the cause of it. Additionally, oftentimes the men are only abusive to her. They don't hurt other people. And she looks around and she says, well, I'm the only one he's hurting, so it must be me. The denial system kicks in because this is how a woman survives when she's in an abusive relationship. The denial basically keeps her sane a lot of times, but it also operates to keep her in an unhealthy relationship a lot of times. And so what she does is she says it's really not that bad.
She minimizes it.
Right, exactly.
Our victim, who has been videotaped, Virginia, is now going to explain to us how she came out of this psychology of denial and moved toward recovery.
There was a cycle that I learned about in the Human Options Shelter that described our relationship perfectly. It literally explained the build-up, that there would be times of calm and peace. Then there would be, whether it be a bill not being paid or the slight, moving furniture, having the television on, you just get angry, and then you just blow up, and then there would be the remorse. And he explained in the book that there would be the remorse where the partner or partners would nurture each other back to health because of the guilt and because of the extreme battering. I mean, the worse the battering, the better the honeymoon. It was like makeup to breakup. And I mean, after that black eye, and after I called the police, and after I left, I'm going to show him, and he showed me by doing that to me. But then he'd come back, whether it be in the middle of the night, he'd break into the apartment, or whether it be a phone call, or whether it be flowers at the door. And then this smile would come on my face. We were very sick. I laughed because I'm ashamed. I would really look for that honeymoon period because that was where we got validated. That was the core of our relationship. That was where, when everything was stripped, when everything was gone, when we were naked, when we were at our lowest point, that's when we would search each other. And that's when we would nurture each other.
Jan, let's talk about this business of recovery. It seems to me the first thing that had to happen for Virginia was a recognition that there was a pattern to this abuse. Is there a frequently seen cycle in an abusive relationship?
Yes, and it's actually been given a name. It's called the cycle of violence. Basically, it has 3 phases. The first phase is what we call the tension building, and this is where there's name-calling and threats. And this is where the man's insecurity and his fear that the woman is going to leave, she's going to find someone she likes better, becomes real intensified. The tension gradually builds, and then the second phase of the cycle that we call the battering phase actually kicks in. And this can be a push, it can be a shove, it can be an all-out beating, depending on how the couple relates. After the battering incident, the third phase of the cycle kicks in, and this can happen almost immediately after the battering incident, or sometimes it takes a couple days for this to develop. This is called the honeymoon phase, or the calm respite, or the loving phase. And this is the part of the cycle that hooks a woman in and keeps her there. This is where the man says, you know, I'm really sorry, and he means it. He's really serious and means it, and promises no matter what she does, he won't hurt her again. And he's very convincing, and he'll often promise her whatever she wants. The woman is devastated this has happened again. She wants to hear he still loves her and that he's sorry, and so they make up. But because nothing's really changed, they haven't really learned to communicate any better, gradually the tension will start to build again and the cycle will repeat itself.
Yes. And this is a standard occurrence in these cases.
Almost all of the women will, once they're explained this kind of thing, they will actually see themselves in it. Sometimes they don't recognize it until it's explained to them. Sometimes they do see that it's occurring.
The emotional abuse here is very interesting to me. It seems to me that the kinds of scars left from fear and intimidation might be as difficult to heal as physical scars from physical abuse.
That's true, and actually the emotional abuse is sometimes the most devastating part. When you're told that you're worth nothing, that you're fat, that you're ugly, that you're stupid, and you're told this over and over again, that's the part that sticks in your mind. The physical wounds heal, that stays there, and that's what's harder to get over a lot of
because of the erosion of self-esteem.
Right, exactly.
If a woman recognizes that she is in a situation like this and wants to call for help, who can she call?
She can call a battered women's hotline. She can call the police. A lot of times that's her first line of help. She can call other kinds of hotlines if she doesn't know of a battered women's line.
For the shelter you work with, Human Options, what is the hotline telephone number?
It's 494-5367.
Thank you. Let's take a look again at Virginia's story and how she came to a shelter for battered women.
Actually, what happened was I took the children from their sleep into a friend's house, into another apartment. Then some family members came and escorted us through the back of the apartment so that no one would see us, that I was leaving. And we left with just the clothes on our backs. And we left in an escort situation where I was in a truck, my children were in another vehicle, and there was a vehicle in front and there was a vehicle in back with armed people. So I was on the floorboard of a truck, leaving friends, family, a life that we had built. My furniture, my antiques, my animals, not to mention my children's rooms with their toys and their beds and memories, pictures, memories, lifetime memories. We were leaving, and as a friend was pushing, don't get up, just keep down. You know, I wanted to see, I wanted to look, to say goodbye. We used anonymous names to board the plane, and we left in the middle of the night, and we arrived in California. My children were asleep, and I felt safe. Even though I was afraid, I thought that maybe he might be behind me, and that fear factor never left me. I did find out eventually that a private investigator was following us, so, you know, I knew that this man would not stop at any level. And so when I did talk to family members here, that's when they suggested that I seek shelter, because I didn't want to endanger anybody else. I mean, this guy's crazy. And then when I was brought to the attention of going to the shelter, I thought, shelter? You know, I was raised going to private school. I learned how to drive a car in a Mercedes-Benz. I mean, I've had a fortunate life. And then to realize that my only salvation was a shelter. I shouldn't say only, because I'm glad that they're there. But, God, I thought, how low have I gotten? And how low has he dragged us?
Jen, is Virginia's story typical? Is this how other women come to a shelter for battered women?
Virginia's story is quite dramatic, and usually women don't come with armed guards in that kind of a situation. But it's similar in that women usually have to sneak out. They certainly don't go with their husband's approval. Oftentimes it's in the middle of the night or it's after he's gone to work. And so it's usually difficult for them to get out of this situation and get to a shelter.
Many women leaving a situation like this might not go to a shelter, but perhaps to a friend, a neighbor, a sister. What kind of services would the shelter provide to women who are not under the roof?
Okay, we have a number of other services. We have a family counseling center where women alone or men or couples or whole families can be seen. And that facility deals particularly with the issues that violent families have to deal with. We also have several groups that meet in the community for battered women. One meets in Costa Mesa, one meets in Irvine, and one meets in Laguna Beach. These meet weekly, and they're open to anybody who feels that they need that.
If I wanted to get involved in a group like that, I could simply call the hotline for information?
That's right. We also have a group for abusive men also.
That's like a counseling session?
It's actually called anger control therapy, and this is where men come and learn other ways to deal with their anger and frustration other than hitting. They learn better communication skills. They learn why they have this need to control this person in their lives.
Yes. Let's go back to our story of Virginia. Virginia stayed in several shelters and also a shelter for the homeless. Let's listen again to her story.
There was limited counseling in the first house, and so I really didn't get well emotionally. My survivor skills were basically on day to day. I couldn't think long term. You know, what am I going to do next month? I couldn't even think that far ahead. And I didn't want to go on a bus to take care of my business. There was a lot of pride still. So my 30 days ended up really just staying alive and functioning on that kind of a level. After that, I realized that I had to go to another shelter, which was the Human Options Shelter in Orange County. This particular home not only provided us with the security that we needed and the safety factor that we needed, but it was a welcome relief to find out that there was a program that was going to help us as a family. There was a child counselor available so that my child, the oldest, could vent. With the love and the nurturing in that household, my youngest one was able to explore and discover. She was 8 months old. She didn't know how to walk. She didn't know how to crawl. She was, you just sat there, and she was a vegetable because of the isolation. He would lock her in a room, and he would lock her in the crib, and leave her alone, leave her alone. So I was glad to see that this household encouraged us to grow, not just on a day-to-day level, but they wanted to see us healthy by providing us with a program of counseling that was 2 times a day of group counseling and any time available one-on-one, 24 hours a day.
Jen, tell us about life in a shelter like Human Options. What is it like for the women and children who come there?
Okay, the women live in a very nice private home. They take care of their children. They take part in doing chores. They communally cook meals. And that's just the living part of it. The bulk of what they do there is trying to get their lives back on course. And there's a very intensive counseling program. We have 9 different groups a week that the women must attend. These cover all kinds of subjects, from what are the women's legal rights to we have a parenting group. We have another group that deals with the dynamics of a relationship. Another group deals with the social service system if they need help from that kind of aspect. Another group actually helps the women clarify their goals, put them down, decide what goals they're going to go after and how they're going to attain these goals. In addition to all the groups, the women get a lot of intensive individual counseling. They're all assigned an individual therapist that they see 2 to 3 times a week, and if they want to, they can talk to a counselor every day. In addition to the women's program, we have a very involved children's program. We have a full-time children's coordinator, and lots of attention is paid to the children. We feel very strongly that this is an atmosphere in which children probably for the first time aren't experiencing any violence either. These kids are not necessarily victims of child abuse, but they're victims of being in an abusive home. And so they need a safe environment where they can learn other ways to deal with anger and frustration other than physical outlets.
What's the typical length of stay?
The women can stay for up to 30 days, and we sometimes extend that to 45 days. If the women stay for a week, they usually stay for the whole program. And it's important if they're going to make any changes in their lives that they do stay for 30 days.
to have that support.
Right.
And that way to rechannel their thinking.
That's right.
What happens after a woman leaves the shelter?
Okay, this can be real difficult because one of the biggest obstacles to women making a transition back into life after the shelter is economics. And we try to help the women find a place to live, but sometimes that's very difficult while they're in the shelter. Often, also, the women discover as soon as they leave that the shelter was just the first step on the way to recovery. So they need to stay in touch. They need to stay in counseling, usually for an extended period. And the shelter offers counseling to women. They can come back for 6 months and see a counselor. The children can come back also and see a counselor. We also have a group particularly geared to our graduates that they can come and take part in. And we have graduates who also take part in actually giving advice. It's called a resident advisory committee, and the shelter listens to what their recommendations are also. If they can maintain a support network with the shelter, their chances of making it on their own are much better.
Yes. Let's return to our story of Virginia. She found that she had a great deal to cope with when she left the shelter.
I realized that at stressful times, I would enact abusive forms that my husband taught me. And I would use them against my children. And against myself. I think I beat myself up quite a bit. It's part of my codependency, I guess. So then I realized that I really didn't get healthy. I mean, I really wasn't healthy from the alcoholic or the codependency disorders. I just moved from the triangle, from the victim to the abuser. So now I'm working on those issues. I'm working on getting out of the triangle altogether by going to graduate. We call it graduate. I'm a graduate from Human Options. So I go back once a month and we talk about life after shelter for an hour, and then we go back for the last hour and talk to the women at the shelter to let them know that there is, life ever after, and so that they can relate to us and hopefully instill some hope into them that they can get out too.
Jan, for those of us who recognize that friends or family are in an abusive relationship, what can we do to be helpful and supportive?
Well, first of all, you can listen to them and let them know that you're not going to be judgmental, and you'll let them talk about it. Oftentimes, people will say that no one ever asked them when they saw their bruises or saw their marks, or knew that they were incapacitated in some way or another. And if they are open, you can tell them that you know about services. Give them information on places like Human Options, and let them know that it's not a normal part of a relationship to be knocked around.
Yes. Jan, thanks very much for being with us. There is much about Virginia's story which is very compelling. Virginia is also moving toward a happy ending.
I speak on domestic issues, and I seek counseling still. And my daughter seeks counseling every now and then, but we're getting there. We're getting there. And I'm going to finish school, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to make my life better financially, so I'm looking at different prospects in my career. So I look forward to a very prosperous future. Should I encounter a person, I know the signs that I need to look for. I'll be a little bit pickier, not so desperate, and hopefully a little bit more loving to myself, so that I can teach my children, as I have taught myself, to accept myself and to love myself. Because when there's nothing else, it's just you.
If a woman does not want to leave her home, but knows that a violent husband should be out of the house, she can obtain a restraining order to keep him out. All she needs to know is that he hurt her, she wants him out, and she needs that legal action in the form of a restraining order. Orange County has a program called Victim Witness, and we have a guest with us here in the studio today named Maxine Rutkowski, who works with that program. Maxine, what is the Victim Witness program?
We're a victim services program, and we offer a variety of services to both victims and witnesses. And my particular center offers assistance to victims of domestic violence in obtaining temporary restraining orders.
So if I wish to get a restraining order like that, I could come to you for the help I needed.
Yes, what we offer is assistance in completing the forms that are necessary in order to have your order granted, and guidance through the legal system.
Where would I come? How would I find victim witness?
Victim witness offices are located at all the courthouses in Orange County, but you must come to the Superior Court in Santa Ana. That's the only courthouse that issues temporary restraining orders.
All right. So I have to come to Santa Ana. But victim witness is not a part of county government, is it?
No, it's a non-profit private organization in Orange County. That may not apply in all the counties.
All right. How difficult is it to get a restraining order? What exactly is involved?
It can be very time-consuming, but typically the person can obtain their orders within a day's time. It does take a good part of the day to do the procedure. They can come to our center, and typically they'll come in the morning. We'll sit down with them, explain to them what's going to be done as far as going through the system, explain how the forms must be completed. We also have videotapes to guide them through completing the forms. We will review the forms for them. We do type up the order that the judge signs, and then we give them both verbal and written instructions on where to go to court, to come back to our office after court, where we'll make copies for them, and again give them instructions on getting their paperwork filed with the county clerk, and information on taking their orders to the police departments and having the defendants served. So it does take a good part of the day. There's a few things that people should be prepared for before they come down to the courthouse. If they have this information, it's to their advantage.
What kinds of information would a person bring?
Prior notice is something that's required by the court here in Orange County. And what prior notice is, it's telling the other party that you're going to be taking out a temporary restraining order against them. In this county, you must tell them a minimum of 4 hours prior to court time, which would mean they need to be informed by 9:30 in the morning.
So a woman who wants to get a restraining order to keep her husband out of the house for a period of time needs to let him know that she is taking that legal action?
Correct.
What if she is afraid to do that?
Okay. What suggestions that we make to the victim is that they don't have to tell him in person. They can do it verbally over the phone. And oftentimes we tell them that they can come down to the courthouse and call from there. And there are certain measures for protection that we can offer to the victim. The marshals are very good about escorting victims through the courthouse, even out to the parking lot if it's needed.
Are there different kinds of restraining orders?
Yes, in this county there's 3 types of orders that you can obtain. Domestic violence orders, which is probably the one most often obtained through our program. Family law orders, which is the type that's filed in conjunction with divorce proceedings. And harassment orders. And civil injunction against harassment is typically the type of order that's taken out against a neighbor. And that is the one type of order that we do not offer any direct assistance with.
Our interest, of course, is in restraining orders to halt a pattern of domestic violence. Are there attorneys in your office?
We do have a volunteer attorney program. The attorneys are in our office twice a week in the morning, and we do try and take appointments for the clients coming in. And the attorneys are there to give counseling to the victim on the judicial system, taking family law orders through the court. Victims can start their initial divorce proceedings through our program, and the attorney is there to review that paperwork for them.
Most people are somewhat intimidated by the process of government bureaucracy, and yet Victim Witness is a non-profit agency linked to the government, but not actually a part of it.
Correct.
What's it like in that office? How challenging, intimidating is it to come in and fill out these papers?
We hope that our office isn't intimidating. We have very caring staff. They're well aware of the emotional situation that the client is in when they do come in. Oftentimes the incident has just recently occurred. Many times they come in, they are injured. And on a few occasions, we've even suggested they go and get medical attention first. So it is, it's something that when they're coming into our office, they're in crisis. This is something that typically has just happened. So we usually try and calm them down. Once you find out that once people are aware of what they're going to have to go through, it's less intimidating. We explain to them that they're going to go to court, that they probably will not talk to a judge or commissioner, or if they do, it's going to be very relaxed. It's not exactly like going into a big trial
with
an
a jury sitting
there. And people, many people have never been in a courtroom before, so they have no idea what they're going up against, and a lot of times they get in there and they're surprised. There's an awful lot of people just like them in there, and they end up sitting there for a good amount of the afternoon.
If a woman were considering the possibility of seeking a restraining order, how can she get information about the Victim Witness Program? Is there a number you can call?
Yes, we do have a 24-hour recorded information specifically on restraining orders, and it gives them all the basic information, including addresses and times and so forth. And that number is 973-0134. We also have a 24-hour hotline with a victim counselor available for services. And the number for that is 957-2737. And the counselor is there to assist all victims of crime and will assist domestic violence victims. A lot of times it may entail finding immediate shelter for that person. They may not be aware of what is available in the county.
So the first number is to get a general overview of the procedures.
Right.
The second number is to talk with the counselor about what to do next.
Right.
Thank you, Maxine, very much. We interviewed attorney Gerald Klein at his law office in Santa Ana. Mr. Klein is a pioneer in law matters related to domestic violence and child abuse. He was on the original board of the Women's Transitional Living Center in North Orange County, which is a women's shelter.
Hi, Carol. I'm sorry that I can't be there with you today, but I am very happy to have this opportunity to provide some input on this subject. It's a very important and very significant problem here in Orange County. The last statistics that we have are that there were 11,000 reports of domestic violence in Orange County in 1987. Battered woman syndrome is such that the woman is abused, battered, and then the man comes back and he apologizes and they hug and they kiss and they make up, and there's this whole repetitive ritual. And little by little the woman's self-esteem is eliminated, her dependence is increased, her fear is increased, and she begins to fall into line. This syndrome is well documented. Once abuse occurs, you must call the police. You absolutely must. You dial 911, you describe to them that you have been injured, that your boyfriend, cohabitor, your husband has hit you, beat you, given you a black eye, broken your arm, kicked you, whatever it is, and you want them to come out. And I'd like to talk for a few moments about some of the things that you need to do to protect yourself after the police have gone. Since you will probably be going to court at a later date, and maybe being asked to testify at a criminal trial, and maybe be interviewed by police investigators regarding the recent incident, you need to have some good documentary evidence of what occurred. Believe it or not, no matter how serious the injuries were, you're going to forget a lot of what has occurred, even a week after it happened. Write down what occurred. Write down the times, what happened. Just generally, don't worry about your spelling or grammar. Just put some notes down that will preserve what happened. Write down the police officer's name. Write down the time and the date. Also, get medical attention. If you have any kind of injuries, get medical attention and take pictures of your injuries. If the injuries are in intimate areas, if you want, you can take your own Polaroid camera with you to the hospital, or to a crisis center that you may be dealing with, and an appropriate individual will take pictures which are as discreet as can possibly be and yet still depict your injuries. Hold on to them, make them available to the police. Be prepared to prove your side of the story. There's something else that should be talked about, and it has to do with many women believing that the abuse was their fault. I did this to him, and he had a right to hit me. You'd be shocked at the number of times that I hear that. Now, there are situations where, let's use a typical example. A woman is emotionally distraught for whatever reason. She has a number of problems. She's not easy to get along with. There are many people that are not easy to get along with. They're very sensitive. They have a number of personal problems. They may be emotionally disabled for some reason or another. And they may very well irritate their spouse. They might irritate the man they live with. They might be extremely irritating. However, there is no justification under any circumstance for there being an abusive response towards such irritation. And when I talked about counseling for abusers, the kinds of programs that you're dealing with emphasize to the abuser how to deal with frustration and anger. It is not by punching, pushing, hitting, yelling, screaming, whatever it is they do. It may be getting up and leaving the room. It may be leaving the house. It may be changing the subject. The response to, no matter how difficult an individual may be, cannot be a violent response under any circumstances. It's morally incorrect and it is against the law. There is help. There are many, many programs, many enlightened programs and enlightened options and enlightened people to help you. Now is the time to do something about it. Most attorneys will either provide a free 1.5 hour consultation or initial consultation or a reduced rate consultation. Don't be afraid to spend some time and maybe even a few dollars, if you have to protect yourself. And as I said, the Victim Witness Program at the Orange County Superior Court, while terribly underfunded and terribly overburdened, is available. And if you can receive help in no other manner, go there. Let's assume that divorce is filed. The court issues restraining orders. Each party gets a lawyer, and the lawyers commence to do their job in representing the individuals in the divorce. Now, the divorce consists of many different elements. You have property, you have children, you have child support, you have what they call spousal support, which is the old alimony. You have the issues of personal restraints, that is, domestic violence, harassment, molesting, sexual assault, and so forth. How are these things dealt with by the courts and by the attorneys? And let's concentrate on how the attorneys might deal with it. First of all, as an attorney, if I represent the batterer, I'm going to advise the individual to stop battering. I'm going to advise the individual to get counseling. I'm going to look to see if there's a basis for maybe reconciliation if the problems can be eliminated. I'm also going to do what I can to keep the fact of battering, especially serious battering, away from the judge. Now, if you have children, if you file a divorce and you go to the Superior Court, you're going to have to go through a process called mediation. That is a court-mandated program where you and your husband will meet with a mental health professional in the mediation and investigative offices at the courthouse. The purpose of those individuals is to assist the two of you in reaching an agreement. Now, if you're going to have mediation and you're going to reach an agreement, to me, that implies equal bargaining power. When you have an abused woman, you do not have equal bargaining power. The woman is intimidated. She may not even want to say that there's abuse going on. There are a couple things that are happening. Statewide, Civil Code Section 4706 point something or another, 4607.2, I was close, indicates that mediators, upon determining that domestic violence exists in a family, will take special steps to speak to the abused individual separately and will not put them in a position of fear, will not require them, unless it is safe, to meet with the spouse in the mediation program. Marshals, who are called bailiffs at the courthouse, can be available to escort the individual, the battered person, in and out of the courthouse, to be available at the mediation, not inside the room, but near their offices, so that the battered person does not feel threatened. If you're in doubt about your situation, make a phone call a hotline, go in and talk to some people, get more information. Information, education, understanding of your options, grabbing some of that power that is available to you is your salvation for getting out of a bad situation. Once you understand what's going on and you understand the options, then you can make intelligent decisions. I hope that some of the information that I've given to you is helpful, and I know that the other members of the panel who will be speaking to you will be giving you additional information in each area and a great deal of their expertise as it applies to their particular roles in the process of either protecting you as police officers or providing counseling or sheltering or hotlines. Feel free to call any of the people on the show at any time of the day or night and ask any questions that you have. Thank you.
Reading about the issues of domestic violence is one way to learn more and to break the cycle, and it is not difficult to find material on this subject. In your library are books like this one by Kathleen Hoffeller, Social, Psychological, and Situational Factors in Wife Abuse. There is a lot of literature in our neighborhood bookstores on the problems, such as this one by Ann Wilson Schaaf on codependence, Misunderstood, Mistreated, and this one, Men Who Hate Women and the Women Who Love Them by Dr. Susan Forward. A classic in the field is Del Martin's book, Battered Wives. In addition to the many books and publications on the problem, there are those which help you bring about change and ease and change the problem. This one by Ernie Larson is called Love Beyond Addiction. And Harriet Lerner has done several books. The Dance of Anger and The Dance of Intimacy are two of hers. All of these books stress the importance of changing our own behaviors. We can never change someone else's. It is only our own. Today's program has focused on the issue of domestic violence and steps that a woman can take to break that cycle of violence. Let's go over some of those now. To break the cycle, one possibility to begin is counseling. A second is calling the police. Third is to use the telephone for various shelter hotlines. A fourth possibility is to contact victim witness. Many women will choose to begin by calling an attorney. Others begin to break the cycle by understanding it better, by reading literature on domestic abuse and violence. And for many women, the appropriate first step is to attend support groups such as Al-Anon and the counseling groups that function through shelters and through the program for adult children of alcoholics. For additional information, contact the Laguna Beach branch of the American Association of University Women by calling this telephone number, 714-494-9647. If we suspect that there is domestic violence in our own neighborhood, what is our responsibility as a friend, as a neighbor, as family?
The best example I can give of how I feel about neighbors is when I came to my new place. I heard someone beating up on someone. It was definitely a male on a female. I don't know if it was father, daughter, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, but they were literally, this woman was in pain. And I realized that the other neighbors would come out and say, well, who is that? Do you hear that? And the typical response was, don't get involved. It's none of our business. And a couple of males was that she probably did something to deserve it, which angered me and put me in a lot of frustration because I was still hearing it and I could hear me. So I made an anonymous phone call to the police because I felt that somebody's got to get involved. And I think that, we are human beings on this earth. We can't negate each other. By negating each other, we're negating ourselves. So maybe this is why people say don't get involved. Because they're in their own denial. And maybe this is what they feel like doing to their spouse. And these are the dysfunctions that have been inherent in our society. Children have no place, women have no place. What I say goes. Oh, honey, he didn't mean it, he didn't mean it. People not taking responsibility for their actions. So we need to take responsibility to each other as brothers and sisters, as human beings. I mean, it's a human right issue. I mean, hopefully, people can get healthy through their dysfunctions. And so I think that the message for neighbors is to get involved. You don't have to know how much money they make. You don't have to know who's sleeping with who. But if somebody's getting hurt, call the police. Seek some help. It's up to us to take care of each other. It's up to us to get well. And if we don't want our children to be as dysfunctional as we are, then let's put a stop. We hear that song, Stop the Madness, about drugs. Let's stop the madness, period. Not just the drugs, but the madness. Get more involved.
Wife beating is finally against the law. The best way to help him is to have him arrested. Wife beating is finally against the law.